It's mid-July in northern Alaska. A huge herd of parent-grown caribou has arrived in May from the mountains and foothills of the Brooks Range, south from here, as part of their annual migration. However, they are not staying idle here for too long. These animals are going to keep running at a relentless pace. Hundreds of thousands of individuals travel at least 10 kilometers per day until they reach as far north as possible on the coast, where the strong winds will keep them protected from the bites. The summer in these lands not only brings good weather but also humidity, and with it the spawn of mosquitoes. A lot of them. Even though it is true that the caribou are also motivated by the search of green pastures, the longest migratory displacement on land performed by any animal on this planet is motivated by annoying mosquitoes. Greetings, my friend, and welcome to It's Not a Monster, on defense of the misunderstood, the despised, the vilified, or just the ugly ones. I am David Andres Quinche, and today we continue with our story about mosquitoes.
So I'm biased, but I do think you can tell Brazilian history through this mosquito.
The history of Brazil has been intertwined with the mosquito since the very creation of its foundations. When the mosquito first arrived in those lands in the same ships that brought African slaves to the American continent. At least 40% of these Africans were brought to Brazilian lands and soon became a major part of Brazil's population, a nation that based most of its economy on slave labor. They were actually the last country of the continent to abolish slavery, and this was something that completely determined a lot of the racial dynamics in this nation, and how they approach a lot of their national challenges through most of their history, including epidemic diseases. With the introduction of mosquitoes by ships, soon all the tropical region of Central and South America became vulnerable to yellow fever epidemics. But it was just until the transition between the 19th and the 20th century that the transmission mechanism of this disease was fully understood. After the defeat of Spain in the Spanish-American War, Cuba became a protectorate of the United States, and then the yellow fever epidemic on the island became a United States concern. After extensive research, a scientific commission discovered that the disease was caused by a pathogen transmitted by mosquitoes. And while the United States was finding their own ways to deal with this problem, in the south, Brazil had just become a republic, rich in natural resources and huge as no other nation on the continent. They had the potential and ambition to become a great power. And a good way to prove that they could do it was to fight the first deadly enemy of the young republic.
If you read historians of science or STS scholars in Brazil, they will mention how the early campaigns in the early 20th century to eliminate Aedes aegypti has become this kind of techno-scientific myth of the foundation of Brazilian science. It was part of a broader campaign to kind of eliminate pestilences from Rio, which was the capital, Brazil capital at the time. The mosquito represented an opportunity for these scientists to say, here, the issue, here I'm using quotation marks, which you can't hear from the audio, but the issue is not our racial makeup, it's not our geographic location, it's these diseases, and if we eliminate these diseases, we'll be able to be part of the so-called civilized nation.
It could sound like a sensible idea, but it was not just about public health. The relationship that the Brazilian oligarchy had made between tropical diseases and the civilizer campaign was mediated by strong racial implications.
What I call in my work is that mosquitoes became a kind of passport to global whiteness, right? Like eliminating the mosquitoes would become a way in which Brazil could join the realm of the civilized nations. And this was particularly important for some scientists, and especially for some politicians, because yellow fever was killing a lot of the immigrants, white immigrants that were being invited to join Brazil to so-called whiten the population. And here, whitening meant not only kind of increasing the phenotypic whiteness of the country, but the politicians also had the hope that these white immigrants would also bring modernization and civilization with them. And this was so early 20th century. The campaigns in Rio were not very popular because they would enter people's homes, they would break any kind of container that had water on them, they would fumigate with sulfur, which is not very pleasant. There was also very unequal how they treated the lower income classes and the higher income classes, which is again very typical. But so, for example, lower income people, when they got the disease, they had to be kind of taken to the hospital and stay there, kind of isolated to make sure that no other mosquito could kind of bite them and transmit the viruses. But higher income people were allowed to stay at home. So again, not very popular overall.
This very aggressive campaign was, however, successful in its main goal, reducing Aedes aegypti population. Even more, once they extended this program to the rest of the country, by the 50s, they had managed to eradicate the mosquito. Brazilians have won. Or at least, that is what it seemed.
It's not very sure if they fully eradicated, because this species, actually, the eggs can last a very long time in the environment. The Aedes aegypti lays its eggs in a container, even a very small container of water. But let's say this container dries up. The egg stays there until water reaches the egg again. So it can stay, if I'm not mistaken, almost up to 1 year like that. It can survive in the environment for a very long time. So it's very hard to be 100% sure if you truly eradicate it, or if the mosquito came back, right? Like global circulation of people and things, the mosquito often hitchhikes.
Whether if it was never fully eradicated, or if it came back from another place, the truth is that the mosquito makes its way back some decades later, as if it were a bad omen of the darkest times that were about to come upon Brazil.
And again, the return of the mosquito happened during our dictatorship, and nobody paid a lot of attention at the time. Maybe because the militaries in power either did not want to to be seen as something negative of their government. Military dictatorships often don't like to highlight things that are not going well in the country, or because they truly didn't see it as an issue, right? The return of the mosquito was not visible until the virus dengue started circulating in the country. And then it became an issue because it made visible how the Aedes was already fully present across the country in all states.
The spread of this new virus, the dengue, was a symptom of a bigger problem, showing the lack of governmental control of the outbreaks in the low-income neighborhoods, stressing the all-known class and racial inequality and struggles.
Dengue outbreaks became part of a broader discussion in the country after desires for redemocratization about the role of the state in providing health for its citizens.
But finally, after huge manifestations calling for freedom and other basic rights, the process of redemocratization was crystallized in 1988 with the writing of a completely new constitution.
Brazil has a very progressive constitution where access to health is a right. Not that it's fully given by the state nowadays, but by law, the state should provide its citizens with proper living conditions, and that's part of providing health as a right.
With the creation of the National Public Universal Health System, Brazil was back in its fight against both yellow fever and dengue epidemic outbreaks.
They tried again in the end of the 80s, early 90s to eradicate the mosquito, and they failed. They realized that it was what they call technically unfeasible. So they created this kind of system of public health workers, agentes de saúde. They are allowed by law to actually enter homes and inspect to see if there are any breeding spots in people's homes. But again, you don't always see the breeding spot, right? It can be in a place where maybe it's not reachable. And it might not even be on the home, but maybe it's somewhere in the street that has some water, and that doesn't become a site of intervention.
After decades of intensive efforts, Aedes aegypti kept thriving in the cities, and outbreaks of these diseases have become expected torments that constantly haunt the country.
One of the arguments that why they managed to eradicate the mosquitoes in the early half of the 20th century was there was less cities, right? The cities were smaller, the urban spaces were not as significant as during the dictatorship, and right after the dictatorship, a lot of people leave the rural areas and go to the city. So cities expand very quickly, often in informal settlements. So controlling mosquitoes in the second half of the 20th century, or this particular mosquito, right, the Aedes aegypti, which is mostly urban. It's not just urban, it exists wherever humans are. But the focus of anti-mosquito campaigns has been the cities, because these are the places where this mosquito becomes a health issue. So the focus has been on cities, and that has been one of the reasons why it has become harder to control mosquitoes or this particular species, because cities are just so much bigger than they were before.
This got even worse after 2014 with the appearance of chikungunya virus, and then in 2015 with Zika, a virus associated with serious complications in pregnancy, affecting fetuses and newborns, which was something that heated up the debate about reproductive justice in a country in which abortion hasn't been completely legalized. This was happening during a time of political crisis in Brazil, and this was a very evident opportunity to see how the mosquito itself could be weaponized in the political debate.
One of the things we saw is that Dilma Rousseff, which was going through an impeachment process and having a lot of criticism both from the left and from the right, this idea of a health emergency was used to kind of create a common enemy, right? So the mosquito as an enemy emerged with a different political meaning, which was also to unite the country. So the campaigns was very much like a country united against this mosquito, but the country was not very united. But it's interesting because then her successor, Michel Temer, he also did the same. He also tried to use the mosquito as okay, you may not agree with me, but we need to unite to fight this enemy. So again, this idea of a common enemy.
But even when it is not used with second intentions, this over-focus on mosquitoes could be harmful. In these tropical countries, for example, thinking of mosquitoes as the main threat to human health can easily make you neglect other aspects of public health that are equally important.
It was interesting because during the Zika outbreak, a lot of people knew that I worked with Zika and came to ask me, friends of mine who were trying to get pregnant or were pregnant would come to me and what do I do? And I would tell them, yeah, and you also should wear condoms and kind of tell your partner to prepare, to use insect repellent and protect themselves. And then none of my friends who I would tell them knew that Zika the virus could also be transmitted through sex. And I was like, what? How do you not know this? Like, this is an important information that should be part of the campaigns. So I wrote this article with anthropologist of health, Carolina Nogueira, because she also had a similar experience.
So, what had been achieved, or at least learned after all these years?
If there was a war against the mosquito, we lost it. And it's interesting because one of the things that I also look at is with climate change, actually the population of the Aedes aegypti and its capacity to transmit virus is predicted to increase. So it's also going to be an even worse issue in the future, or predicted to be a worse issue in the future. So the kind of historical approach to just try to eliminate the mosquito is failing, and I don't see a way in which it will be successful in the future. So, and the scientists know that as well. What's the saying? Like, if you can't beat them, join them.
This last sentence embodies a change of paradigm that is taking place in the heart of Brazil. Nowadays, instead of just trying to kill their populations, the implementation of modern biotechnologies allow us to have a different approach to mosquitoes. This is what Luisa has been studying, how these new projects are being implemented and what impact they are having on Brazilian society.
So I did research in different groups in Brazil. So first, for kind of my master thesis, was about genetically modified mosquitoes. The idea is that you mass produce these mosquitoes, you separate females and males because only females fight for blood. And then you release these genetically modified males to mate with the so-called wild females, and the offspring should not reach adulthood. So this is one project. For my PhD, I also look at 3 other projects. One was using infecting mosquitoes with a bacterium called Wolbachia, which hinders viral replication. This one releases both males and females. And the idea is that the bacterium is transmitted from a female mosquito to its progeny. So you release female mosquitoes with Wolbachia, and if the female mosquito with Wolbachia mates with a wild male with or without the Wolbachia, the progeny will have Wolbachia. But the males with Wolbachia, if they mate with a female without the bacterium, because of something called cytoplasmatic incompatibility, there will be no offspring. This is not about reducing the population of mosquitoes, but transforming the mosquito from a vector into a non-vector. The second other project that I accompanied during my PhD research was a group that was irradiating male mosquitoes, and these became sterile, and then they released. Kind of a similar logic than the genetically modified mosquito, which again, it's about suppressing the population. And the third one was a group that was kind of trapping mosquitoes and testing them to see what kind of viruses were in their body. And the idea is to transform mosquitoes into a sort of sentinel that could kind of map outbreak before the outbreak happened. So different ways of using the mosquito in each case.
Excluding the last project, which is a different way to use mosquitoes without directly affecting their populations, we can gather these and other similar projects in 2 main categories: those that focus on population suppression and those that focus on population transformation. Population suppression is a strategy that aims to release modified mosquitoes that, in the long term, would cause the reduction of the whole population, like the genetically modified or the male irradiated mosquito projects. This method is effective in its population control goal and simpler in its technical approach, but it requires constant reinforcement. If you stop releasing modified mosquitoes, it wouldn't take too long until the population fully recovers. The other strategy, the population transformation approach, like the ones that use Wolbachia, looks for releasing mosquitoes that, in one way or another, had been made immune to the virus. Once these modified mosquitoes replace the non-resistant ones, the wild population of mosquitoes becomes a non-vector one. However, both isoprojects required, in essence, the same thing: breeding and releasing mosquitoes.
Sometimes it's hard to make non-Brazilians understand how strong how ubiquitous and kind of established the anti-mosquito campaigns in the country are, right? Like it's part of Brazil's educational system. You learn at school how to kill mosquitoes. So one of the hardest things when we go to schools is that they would talk about this project, and the kids were like, "Oh, but I kill mosquitoes," and it was kind of like it was kind of going against everything what people had been taught from very young. So they had this hard time in making sense of this new kind of relation with mosquitoes. For example, for the genetically modified mosquitoes, the idea is to only release non-biting males. How they would do is they would create this kind of somatic experience of not being bitten. They would do these public engagement activities where they would bring a box, like a mesh, filled with male mosquitoes, genetically modified mosquitoes, and they would tell people to put their hands inside and not be bitten. But the Wolbachia has a much harder time on their campaigns because they need to release both males and females, right? So they are releasing not only non-biting males, but also biting females. They have to kind of change the public image of the mosquito, right? So calling it Vobito, which is kind of a cute name, or like friendly mosquito. But the need to release these mosquitoes can only be justified if you still have the threatening mosquito looming in the background, right?
This is what Luisa called becoming without.
So there's no reason to release friendly mosquitoes if all mosquitoes are friendly. So you have to kind of constantly being saying, here, these mosquitoes are friendly, but because other mosquitoes are not, right? So they have to be constantly being a friend and an enemy at the same time in order for the projects to justify their existence.
So, with these projects, we can see how the relationship between human societies and mosquitoes could be more complicated than simply portraying them as villains, as animals that are inherently prejudicial, that represent a menace to human by its nature. As we said before, the mosquito is not the original cause, but a potential vector for the transmission of some diseases. And this means, of course, that if there is a population free of this virus, this mosquito, Aedes aegypti, does not represent any threat.
So there's this environmental STS scholar called Túlio da Silva Maia, who did work on sertanejos, like kind of the hinterlands of Brazil. And that's a place where mosquitoes don't transmit pathogenic viruses. And he talks about how the sertanejos see the bite not as or see the mosquitoes bite as just like the mosquito struggle, right? Like, so mosquitoes are biting because that's how they survive, just like we're trying to survive as well. Yeah, the bites is just a mosquito struggle more than a kind of potential harm to humans.
All this can give us a clue of a good direction to go. Last year, there was almost 2 million cases of dengue in Brazil and at least 600 deaths. However, in places like Niterói, a small town next to Rio de Janeiro, the cases had been 7 times lower than the national average. They have successfully implemented the Wolbachia mosquito project that was developed in Rio for 9 years, in a campaign that has included close communication between family doctors and neighborhood leaders, and health agents monitoring not only houses but also public spaces and abandoned buildings. There is also an ongoing development of a national vaccine against dengue that looks promising. As I told you at the beginning of this story, I do not bring you a naive story about how mosquitoes are completely harmless. I'm not telling you that if you live in a place where these born diseases are present, you should stop killing the mosquito that is about to bite you. I just wanted to show you the role that this animal plays in this public health problem from a bigger frame, and why thinking about their complete eradication is not feasible, is not useful, and could be even harmful. Each time an animal species goes extinct, it's a tragedy. It is the death of a unique poem that is never going to be told again in the universe. Today I tried to read you some of the verses of that poem. I tried to make you feel the depth and uniqueness of those lines. Resolving the problem of tropical-borne diseases require a broad range of measures that go beyond the eradication of the mosquito, and changing the way in which we think about mosquitoes and vector-borne diseases could be the key to escape this dead end in which we have been stuck for more than a century.
So I will be honest, if I see a mosquito, I'll still kill it. But I have gained a higher recognition of their incredible adaptation capacity, right? They're very, the fact that humans have been trying to get rid of this mosquito for more than 100 years and have failed shows the limits of human action, right? The incredible capacity of nature to adapt. And I think mosquitoes reminds humans to be more humble. It's this tiny insect that doesn't seem very, it's not an animal that will attack you in a very visible way. But there's again this work from Timothy Mitchell. I don't know if you know, he has a chapter on his book called Can the Mosquitoes Speak? And it's very much showing efforts to control, it's about in Egypt, River Nile and the malaria vector Anopheles kept failing, right? And it shows the limits of the modernist ideal of fully controlling nature, right? This tiny insect is capable of bypassing all human forms of intervention. So I have gained a different kind of appreciation for the mosquito.
You can find references and extra material at the description. This episode was produced by me, David Quinche Giraldo, and with the collaboration of our interviewee, Luisa Reis Castro.
I do think mosquitoes in general are fascinating creatures they might not be great to live with, that's maybe the issue, but they're great to think with. So, and that's that tension of what it means that we're not going to have to live with mosquitoes, and what does it mean to figure out strategies to live with mosquitoes is something that interests me. So thank you for your questions and for thinking with me about mosquitoes.
Thanks for listening, and see you next time.